This conference will now be recorded.
Well, thank you all for joining me for one more session of our virtual business networking. Today is, let's see, March the 15th, 2023. There's a couple of things that are going on that are very interesting. One has been going on for a little bit, one is relatively new. The relatively new one is a place called Silicon Valley Bank, which has been coming out on the news. And like somebody said earlier today in one of the TV programs that I watched, the average American didn't know about this place a week ago. And now all of a sudden is a total crisis. So hopefully we'll have some time to talk a little bit about that. The other thing that's going on, and now this has been going on for a couple of weeks, but still the response is not there, and we're going to have some interesting conversation, is the train derailment that happened over here in Ohio in East Palestine, and the government is trying to work through that. But before we do that, this meeting always has three parts. The first part is we're going to go through a round of introductions. The second part is maybe some of those introductions will trigger questions or follow ups or comments. And then after that, we'll dive into these two topics plus anything else that anybody wants to talk about. So I will start with my veterans and know the process better than I do. And since I'm an old school gentleman, we're going to start with ladies first. So Rhoda, why don't you take a minute or two to introduce yourself, and then we'll go to Patrick, and then we'll go to Dolph, and again, then we'll see if the introductions trigger some questions or some follow up.
Dub. I'm in Indianapolis, Indiana, and my 16-year-old business is called Say It For You. And we are a team of ghostwriters, content marketers, and we write primarily blogs and web page content for a variety of clients. Um, and I am currently looking to land a client that is in the transportation business in some manner, that needs to recruit drivers. So that's something that I've had some experience, but I'm not now doing, and I have the perfect writer for that. So if you have an introduction to make, we will say it for them.
Perfect, fantastic. Thank you very much. And Patrick, why don't you take a round at introducing yourself, please?
Hello, everybody, and I'm Patrick from Ireland. I'm not St. Patrick. I'll be St. Patrick on Friday, but today I'm just Patrick. But and I was saying to Sal earlier on that St. Patrick, he came here in the 5th century. Imagine the 5th century, and the folklore tells us that he was here to get rid of snakes, and we don't have snakes in Ireland. But he was invited back in 2008 to get rid of bankers, but he failed miserably. But he proclaimed the message that he was originally here to what he proclaimed that Christ as the only type of hope of life in the world. And that still is relevant. But for me and what I do, I have a wonderful privilege of being an associate in a business of global entrepreneurs who are on a mission to create as many thousandaires as possible over the next 6 to 12 months. And that's helping as many people as possible to earn an additional $1,000 extra a month above and beyond what they're already earning. And the reason for this is we're all heading we're all told heading into a global recession, and some would say we're already in it. Will you wake up? And inflation is at a 40-year high, and the price of everything is increasing, and the price of chief executive of oil companies has gone beyond the roof, and I just can't connect the dots. And so how are we doing this? We are bringing to the marketplace some really cool products that millions of people both want and need. and products that are addressing things like fatigue, brain fog, and stress. And in consumer studies, we found that 81% of people felt a positive difference using these products. And does that sound like something that you might like to know more about? My details will be in the chat in a second. And it's wonderful to be here, as usual, with Sal Costa in the chair. And he's the man. He's the man, you know.
Well, thank you very much, Patrick. Because yes, Patrick and Rhoda, you guys have been incredibly faithful and loyal. I don't think you've missed a meeting last year or this year. And Dolph, before I turn it over to you, and I apologize for the short notice, and maybe you know this, but later today at 6 p.m., I think it is, the Pittsburgh Business Exchange is having the great gathering over there at the Hilton in South Point. So again, another really, really wonderful activity. That is actually their best activity for the whole year. So I don't know if you know about it or not. If you don't, sorry for the short notice, but I figured I'd at least mention it in case you're interested. I'm actually going to pop over there at 6 p.m. So just so you know.
I, uh, I'd love to. Unfortunately, I have a few conflicts. So I'm Dolph Santarine. I'm in Wheeling, West Virginia, and I think that I'm currently a real estate entrepreneur. We own about 400 apartments in two distinctly different neighborhoods here in Wheeling, and we rent out, uh, single family homes, but primarily apartments in the area. And my wife is running it. I mean, she let me run around the country and do startups historically. So, now it's her turn. So, and she brings very positive numbers to the bottom line. But I was originally a tech entrepreneur and sold my business in '07 to USA Today, Gannett, and have done extremely well with it. And this is kind of our our build for retirement investment. And it's been very much an eye-opening experience. It's a very different kind of business than anything I've been in before.
Okay, very good. And I have a couple questions for you given the latest happenings. But before I even go into that, does anybody have any questions for anybody based on the introductions? Rhoda.
Yeah, my older son, who lives in Winnetka, Illinois, is an apartment um, owner. You know, he buys shares in ventures of various kinds, and storefronts, and shopping centers, and so on. And the headlines in Indiana are terrible because everybody hates the landlords because they're not fixing the apartments and doing what they're supposed to do to take care of it. And they, on the other hand, the landlords hate the tenants because they can't get rid of them because they won't let them kick them out if they don't pay. So it's just a terrible situation with the apartments, and the rents keep going up and up and up and up and up.
Well, we're fortunate. Wheeling has been historically extremely stable, and the laws are such that, even during COVID, we had no trouble getting evictions for non-payment. So
Really?
yeah, and 40% of our units are occupied by HUD tenants, so they have HUD vouchers, so they're on
Yeah.
some form of assistance. And of course, we just went through a lot of people don't realize, but a lot of this money that ended up going out to people for COVID relief included, basically for the last 18 months, the government's been 100% paying their rent. And we joke about it internally, but we saw the rent to own trucks pulling up in front of some of our units, and the first comment was, "Oh, we'll be evicting them in 90 days." And unfortunately, a lot of that has come to pass. It's not something I enjoy doing. It's usually, if I'm moving for an eviction, I'm losing money on the deal. But we've not had that problem. But we've also not had tremendously accelerating rents either. Now, with one exception, we have a very limited number of all utilities included apartments, and those are going up because gas and electricity are more expensive.
Yeah. Um, I am an apartment dweller, but in a luxury apartment complex,
Hmm.
and it's all electric, and we pay our own electric bills. So separately. So my electric bill for a two-bedroom apartment is over $300 for the month. So it's really escalated, and it's been as high as 400, in the depth of winter. So that's a big deal, and I don't, I'm one person, not a family.
Right. We've seen some of that locally.
Yeah,
A large developer. I mean, we're 400 doors, and a large developer with 13,000 doors came in, and they built 50 units down in South Wheeling, and
right.
they were total electric, and we had tenants that ooh, new cabinets, new place, and they went down there, and then they got their first electric bill in February for January, and they were like, can we move back?
Right, right. Yeah.
But we've got 5 crews right now, 2-man crews that are out, either doing rehabs on empties or working maintenance orders. And we have a formal system for doing it. And I'm sure like what you experience with your uh, in your luxury apartment.
Hmm.
We find that, we end up getting most of our maintenance orders come in on cell phones. And um, we endeavor to respond to them.
Yeah.
Well, so far, it hasn't made too many sleepless nights.
Good.
Do- Sorry,
Well, Dolph, let
Dolph.
me ask you a question because there's two things that, well, one of them is more or less already happening. The other one may or may not be happening or may be on the horizon, and I think they're both actually going to be favorable to you in terms of people renting apartment versus buying or houses or whatever. So obviously, one is interest rates are going up.
Yep, and
So
that
it's
takes people out of the buy market and drives them into the rent market.
exactly. Exactly. So I was wondering how much of that you have seen, how much of that you expect to continue seeing, how much of that you expect the interest rates to keep even going up further and driving people your way. And the other one, which again I'm not sure how it's going to shake out. There's a little bit of cross currents, but I think net it might be a positive for you, frankly, is if there's a recession. And let's say a family that maybe both of them work at some point, but now only one of them is working. Same thing. There's drive them out of a big house, maybe to a smaller apartment. So do you see the recession as net positive or not, just because simply people lose work and income and whatnot?
Well, it's slowed down a lot of people, and the renters tend to end up being in two, at least in our view, in two different categories. And there's one category where they either want a luxury place or in a luxury place. They generally have good credit, they're financially stable, and it's not a problem. The other side are people who can't buy a house. And there's a reason that somebody's got a 400 credit score. And that's why we have some of those units that I talked about that are all utilities included, because they can't even get credit from the gas company in order to get their gas turned on, or for that matter, the water company. And when it comes down to the electric and the water and the gas, and it's kind of funny, but the government entity, which is the electric or the water company, is the toughest to get credit with. It's really remarkable. But I guess that's something to be expected. But you know, I don't see the market um, getting soft for residential rentals for the foreseeable future. You know, but this area is kind of a microcosm. This area didn't, when um, the banks were drinking the Kool-Aid and handing out interest-only loans, none of the banks in the northern panhandle of West Virginia or Pennsylvania or Ohio, which are both very close. I mean, I'm in West Virginia, but I'm less than a mile as the crow flies from Ohio and the Ohio River. So it kind of acts as one, even though it's two different states, it kind of acts as one location. But they didn't hand out garbage loans. They weren't doing interest only, and it created a lot of stability. So this area kind of sailed through that without huge problems locally.
Can I
Okay.
draw a comparison with Ireland, Dolph? I know nothing about the property market, right? We own our own house and we're not interested. Because we're involved in other things. But the situation in Ireland is that rent prices are going up, and that has the contributory factors there are shortages of accommodation, and we've taken in 73,000 Ukrainians, and it's driving up shortages. It's putting pressure. But the really interesting thing that I don't understand is that despite the high prices for rented property, landlords are leaving the market.
Yeah.
Is that happening there for you, or can you unpack that one for me slightly?
I don't know how much rent control. I know that in cities like Chicago and New York, landlords are actively leaving the market because there's rent control.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
and rent control is a real problem. I don't know what level of that you have in Ireland.
We have some of it, but there's another um, narrative, and it is about poverty. That all right, people may not be taking full responsibility for the decisions they're making in their lives, but poverty is the most disgusting thing in any society. Social and cultural poverty. And there's this balancing thing that the government has to try and do, and which the government in America are attempting to do. But look, um, I don't know. I don't, you know, I don't
Well,
know.
I will tell you, there's one more element, and Dolph, you can tell me, maybe you're not seeing this too much in Wheeling, but maybe you've heard about it in Pittsburgh or other cities. And I just read about it in the news. Well, and I talk to people like we're doing right now. I used before the pandemic, I would go to Pittsburgh 2, 3 times a week on business. A lot of times it was downtown, a lot of times it wasn't, but I was very familiar with downtown. What has happened after the pandemic is because a lot of people are working from home, there's less sort of traffic, there's less people downtown. That I think has allowed the crime to get a little bit out of control. And so now what happens is nobody's happy with the crime downtown. Now that's affecting more than anything else the businesses. A lot of the businesses, bars, restaurants, whatever, have said, "Hey, listen, guys, as soon as our lease is over, we're out of here." And I don't know if they're out of here to close or to move somewhere else or whatever the case may be. But at the same time, then the people that live downtown, and a lot of times are trying to convert a lot of these offices to residential, that's going to be an uphill battle because again, those people don't want the crime either. So anyway, I don't know, Dolph, if again, hopefully you're not seeing that in Wheeling, but what is your take on all that? Do you agree with that? Do you see that in other places?
You know, I think what happened is the people who could work remotely did. And I think it's really hurt downtowns. And it's hurt certainly the restaurant trade downtowns in many of the downtown areas. I think it's come back. Fortunately, in West Virginia, we walked away from the lockdown fairly early, unlike some other states. So I think that's worked out well. But, I think that the cities need to demonstrate that they're a safe place before people go back there. I mean, I grew up outside of New York City, and I'm in no rush to go back. There's shows I'd like to see, there's restaurants I'd like to sample, and I've just heard too many horror stories from my contemporaries about people who had trouble.
Okay. Yep, fair enough. All right. Anything else on real estate before we take a couple of minutes to talk about Silicon Valley Bank and the derailment in East Palestine? Because I do want to talk about those two for a second. But since we have Dolph, who's very well versed in the real estate industry, um, by the way, do you know Paul Agostinelli? Dolph, do you
I'm
know
sorry.
Paul Agostinelli?
The name rings a bell. I can't say that I do.
Okay, I'll introduce you via email. He is the leader in Pittsburgh for the Real Estate Investors Association, and he's actually the commercial chapter.
Ah,
Um,
okay.
so you guys, even though he's up in Pittsburgh, you're down here in Wheeling. I think you're going to have a lot of things in common to talk about. So I'll give you guys, I'll make that mutual introduction. All right. Anything else with real estate before we move to East Palestine or SVB or anything else? No.
Well,
Dolph.
now that we know Dolph has huge insights into it, we'll be able to sleep better tonight. I mean,
Well, hey
and thank
Patrick,
you,
maybe you
God.
can invest in an apartment over here in Wheeling or Pittsburgh and come visit us.
Yeah, yeah, that'll be good. That'll be good. That'll be good. It's an amazing problem, and it's amazing industry with amazing people. They're giving a service, and they're not liked.
Well,
I
Anyway,
mean,
well, listen, Patrick, tell me a little bit because I know we started talking about this before we started the recording. How much publicity is this whole thing with Silicon Valley Bank getting over there in Ireland? How much is it coming out in the news, and
yeah,
how much is it affecting you over there?
we don't know. Well, I don't know. But there was a guy here. He was a real entrepreneur, and he got wind of this and took his billions out of it. And just like you were telling about the people going skiing and on the phone and taking their money out, can you imagine what that must be like? I mean, I remember studying business at school, and the big fear of any bank was that everybody would want their money on a Friday at 12 o'clock, or something. But at least they had money then. They don't have it now. Can't give you how you transfer a billion, I don't know, or 10 million or whatever. I mean, it's and the speed of it's incredible.
Yep. Rhoda, from your clients, have you seen any comments, any anguish, any anxiety, any issues with the banking system right now?
Well, obviously, one of my biggest clients is a wealth management firm, so they're worried about it because the market dropped like a lot, including today. So that's you know, even though this firm has been around and they've been through stuff, you know what I mean, and they weathered 2008, but so they're worried. The other clients, no, not necessarily. Everybody is a little bit antsy about how is this going to work, but very few of my clients have more than 250,000 anywhere.
Yeah, no, that is the good thing. Of course, I remember that's been around. I don't even know, but at least certainly since I started working, and of course when I started working, 250,000 was a lot more than now. So, and and that I'll just make a general comment on that. Every time there's legislation, they put in these fixed dollar amounts. Hardly ever do they index them for inflation. So, it may have made sense again back in the mid 80s when I started working, and now in 2023, unfortunately 250,000 is not what it used to be. Um, but yeah, I mean it's the good news, I guess, is maybe there's an interpretation that at least in practice it's the coverage is going to be unlimited, because I think with Silicon Valley Bank they are making depositors completely whole, independent of that 250,000 limit. And so, of course, once you do it once, the question is, how can you not keep doing it forever, right? Um, so, who knows?
Well,
But I
we
will tell
we
you this, by the way. Charles Schwab, their stock dropped 20%. And frankly, I would have thought that Charles Schwab was something that wouldn't have that much exposure to the banking industry because they're more of a brokerage house than a bank. But I guess people got enough nervous enough that I got reflected in the stock price dropping 20%. It did rebound like a day later, not 100%, but clearly there was anxiety.
Did you see the interview of Mr. Wonderful from Shark Tank talking on
No.
Fox? And he explained that he has his job is managing money. Obviously, he's the mutual fund king. So he said, yeah. This was stupidity that didn't need to happen, and but he says I'm a big boy and you know we'll survive here.
Well, isn't it amazing? Nobody seems to have oversight, you know. I mean, if we were the directors of the bank, right, and we'll say Sal decided to make a bad call, and we could say, hold on a minute, Sal, come here, come here. No, you're wrong there. The three of us think you're wrong, and then Dolph would have a private word with you, and he'd convince you, and then you wouldn't invest it, and then we'd all be okay, you know. So it seems to be reckless, you know, reckless.
I mean, the focus is so off now. Indiana just spent the last week in the legislature debating whether trans men could play on girls' sports teams.
Ah, stop, will
Okay,
you,
and,
for
and
God's sake?
I mean that's what they spent the last week on. So think about that relative to what's going on in the world. It's incredible.
Oh yeah, no, Rhoda. Again, this is supposed to be a business forum, but sometimes it's hard to separate business from politics and from everything else that goes on in the world. But you're absolutely right. When you have, and this is something we haven't talked about, but when you have the Russians basically knocking down a U.S. drone in international airspace, and now we're
Right,
talking about can the trans guys play in
right,
the
and
women's teams, and then I'm
balloons.
sitting here
Yeah,
like, okay, guys, I think we got bigger problems.
that's right. We have major problems. So yes, it's very very worrisome. It really really is. Um, so
Rhoda, if you go for election, we will put your name on the side of the bus, right? And we will campaign for you because you're a solid person who has really solid ideas. Are you up for it?
no,
Oh,
nothing but
come
that. I
on,
want to.
Rhoda. The
I said
country needs you. The
no,
country
no,
needs you,
no.
Rhoda.
I've decided that I'm going to die a CFP, a certified financial planner, and a blonde. But I'm not
Oh
going to
my
die a
God.
politician. That's for sure.
All right, guys. Maybe one last topic, or maybe two. I don't know if you guys want to talk a little bit about the drone and the Russian fighter jets the other day. But before we talk about that, because we were talking about this one again before I started the recording, it was completely amazing to me, and I think this information is right because I heard it several times. That in this country, in a year, there's 1,000 train derailments. Obviously, the one in East Palestine has gotten a lot of publicity because of the toxic waste and a lot of things. Oh, we have somebody joining us.
And in Indiana, that's a big topic, by the way, because they're dumping the stuff here.
Yeah. Uh, Rashna, welcome. How are you? Oh, okay. Can you hear us, Rashna?
Yes, yes. I'm so sorry for being super late, super duper late.
Oh
We'll
no, that's
never forget
fine.
it.
You're
We'll
welcome.
never
I'm
forget
sorry
you
that
for
you're
being
late.
late.
But let's do the following. Because we went through a round of introductions at the beginning. Would you like to take a minute or two to introduce yourself to the group? Say where you are, what you do, products and services that you provide, maybe what would be a good lead for you?
Okay. So my name is Rachna. I am from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I've been a realtor for past 8 years, and currently I'm also a loan officer. I do a lot of property management in this area as well. So real estate is my thing. Um, my family owns some real estate as well, so we buy, sell, rent, the whole thing along with it. And
Ah,
a good lead would be somebody looking for any kind of investment properties for renting, owning, refinancing, financing, whatever. I work with Sistar Mortgage, and Sistar Mortgage is known for investment deals.
okay, perfect. Well, listen, let me ask you for a favor. Put your contact information in the chat because I send that out to everybody at the end of our meeting. And Dolph is actually a very big real estate investor here in Wheeling, a little bit south of Pittsburgh.
Okay,
So we were talking about that. So you both may want to do an offline meeting later. So please put your contact information in the chat.
sure, will do.
Yeah. Um, so anyway, we were kind of now just talking about general business topics. I was hearing the other day, and I'm assuming this statistic is right, that there's 1,000 train derailments in the U.S. every year. And if you think about it, that's almost like three a day, right? Because the year has 365 days. Um, to me, that is unbelievable, and it comes from my background having worked in companies that were very big into operations, very big into quality, very big into weeding out failures. And to me, there can't be a bigger failure than a train derailment. I worked for places like Motorola, Hewlett Packard, where you literally had to get rid of half your failures every year. Okay, if one year you had 1,000 failures, your goal for the next year was to have 500 failures, and that was just almost like gospel. I mean, nobody questioned it. That's just what you had to do, and your reviews, your performance reviews, your bonus, everything just hinged on your ability to do that. So anyway, do you guys find it offensive that there's 1,000 derailments every year and apparently there's not that much progress being done? And last thing I'll say is there was 1,000 airplane accidents every year,
There
it would
would
be
be
total
not
chaos.
just.
So anybody want
Yes.
to
Well,
comment on that?
Yeah,
they say, Sal, that the most dangerous part of flying is the drive to the airport.
I love that. I
Although,
in another
unfortunately,
lifestyle, I worked for British Rail. I was a communications engineer, telecoms, and it was a state-owned body at the time, and they were paranoid about safety. And rarely were there accidents. For instance, if there was to be a signal change, the plans would be drawn up and they would be circulated with through seven people who would know what they were talking about, and they would sign off, and these plans then were put into a safe and locked in case there was an incident, and the plans would be taken out. You signed off on this, you signed off on, why did you do this? So um, I don't know what the system there is, but that is an awful lot of accidents. But it's an awful lot of potential injuries and otherwise, but also the long-term injuries and having to fund that. The life cost of an accident. The life cost of an accident.
Definitely. As we speak, the delivery of the waste material from that train wreck has been suspended. It was targeted for Indiana for our landfill, and because of all the objections, there's all kinds of politics going on. Um, it hasn't yet arrived.
Wow.
So it's very worrisome because obviously um, we already have problems in Indiana, especially in northern Indiana, with backfilling the the sludge ponds, of the waste. So now we're planning to bring in more toxic waste. It's very, the whole thing is very disturbing.
I was hearing a podcast yesterday and they were mentioning something about property values that went down and to the
Yep.
point where the properties are not even sellable. People
Wow.
are pretty much stuck with their investment, their money. They can't get
Right.
out, they can't be in.
Right.
It's messed up. It's messed up.
Well,
Wow.
yeah, you're right,
Wow.
because if you needed to be, let's just even say in that area for whatever reason, family, work, whatever, I would try to go as far away as possible to rent or to buy. I mean,
Yeah.
just to even if it's just renting, do you want to be exposed to whatever's in the air?
Yeah. Yeah. And that exposure, we never know. It's going to be 1 year, 2 years, or it's going to be an ongoing thing, for another 5, 6 years. We don't know. Especially the vegetation, that becomes a problem. The local grown food, if it is edible anymore.
Definitely. It's a
Yeah.
major problem.
Yeah.
Where
Well,
are
not
you
only
from,
that, the
Raja?
animals drink the water. Some animals eat other animals. So I mean, and obviously
Oh,
as time goes by and this thing kind of gets diluted, right? But at least for a while,
What's that? What's that?
the
What's that?
transmission is unpredictable.
That old adage that the solution to pollution is dilution.
Exactly. Exactly. I was thinking the same thing, Dolph. And listen, maybe you should all move to Ireland for about 3 years. It's fairly clean and it's very green.
it
And
is
you,
beautiful.
you mightn't like the amount of rain, but look, it's an option. I'm just throwing it out there, and you can go online just like we are now.
Can you figure out the investment opportunities for US people?
I don't know. I don't know. You see,
Yeah. Well, I have you
I'm
know,
talking about
Patrick,
the
I've been
health.
in
Health.
Ireland.
Yeah, you. Well, look, and if I'm right in thinking Dolph there was drinking a pint of Guinness earlier on, I saw the glass and it was dark and it had a head on it and
Believe me, unfortunately, this is just. I wish this were a pint of Guinness. I'd be perfectly happy. But I assure you, on Friday and Saturday, there will be a pint of Guinness going.
Oh, wow.
And
By the
Dolph
way,
likes rum and cigars.
oh, there we go. If you haven't been to the airport in Dublin, they are having a few years back they were having quite a project, and they described how much soil was being moved by equating it to pints of Guinness.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
Equating it to what?
that's how popular it is.
Yeah, they were equating it to pints of Guinness. That is very good.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, listen. One last topic, and we'll disband. Um, so I'm sure you know, and I've time flies. This might have been the day before yesterday by now, but there was an MQ-9 Reaper flying in international airspace, and I guess first the Russian jets came by and dumped fuel on them, which is actually a little bit unusual. In the sense that I think most planes, at least the commercial ones, most of them don't have the ability to dump fuel. But whatever, I guess these guys did, and they used it. So they dumped fuel on the thing, and I guess that wasn't enough to bring it down and screw it up. And then apparently they collided with one of the propellers. To me, from the news, it was unclear if it was an accident or on purpose, but they're making it sound like it was on purpose. And anyway, long story short, I guess the Reaper had to go out into the sea because it couldn't fly anymore, and the Russian plane was damaged to a certain extent, but was able to land safely. Um, what is and it goes back to the same thing. What is the end game here? Okay, I know some Republicans in the U.S. prior to this were making the case that, hey, we're spending too much money in Ukraine. It's really not our fight to fight, whatever. Let's stop. Let's start toning it down. But now I'm afraid, frankly, if you do that, it's going to show weakness. Um, so I'll stop there. What is the end game? What happens here? How
Well,
do
I would love to know what the UN are doing. You know, what are they doing? What is their? We know their mandate. You know that
Usual nothing.
conflict will never happen again. You know all this kind of stuff. But
No, usual
when
nothing.
we see um, advert advertising for help the children in Ukraine, you know, and there's just so much damage there, needless damage. It's dreadful, but we need help, and they do need help. But you never see advertised, you know, would you? We're having a collection for a tank, you know. Now a tank costs 4 million or something, you know, or we want a collection for a howitzer, you know, and all the ammunition. We don't see, we never hear that. So how are they funding this? It's incredible. You know, there's a plead for housing and children and, you know, help people, which is needed, but there's never a collection for a tank or armaments. You know, it's just a
Well, that's
question.
because the U.S. is providing it and NATO is providing it. First the
Yeah,
U.S., but then second the rest of NATO. So
yeah. So maybe the future is to become an arms dealer, is it? I mean, it's inflation proof, and it's there's always something going on there, you know, and you know. Uh, it's not funny. It's just dreadful, you know, dreadful conflict.
Sal, if you don't mind, I'm gonna, I find, I almost, I don't want to say I find it amusing because there's nothing funny about it. But when I look at the Ukraine, I see a country where a third of the people love the Russians, a third of them hate the Russians, and a third want to be Polish. and and all of a sudden they've got this massive conflict, and the conflict was basically, and maybe I look at the conflict the wrong way. I mean, I thought Putin went fishing with Biden, and he was looking for some level of assurance that um, that the United States wouldn't be inviting the Ukraine into NATO, and he absolutely refused to give him that. And a week later, he invaded. And I guess I look at this whole thing and I'm a lot taken aback. I'm pleasantly surprised that the Ukrainians have done so well repelling the Russians. And I think the rest of the world is kind of now looking at Russia as a toothless tiger. And I don't understand the end game. You know, what does Russia want? Do they want the eastern third of the country? And the problem is, who's going to end up, if that indeed happens, who's going to end up who's going to end up negotiating that deal? I
Right.
just, uh, oh, what what's what is the path to making the killing stop?
Great
See,
question, Dolph. I agree with you totally. Well done.
the the way Russia is positioned in the world map, it has no access to the sea unless it goes through Ukraine. So it makes for them to have a political sense to go fight, invade the country and get it. And for them, one third of the country is already theirs because they agree with Russia.
Mm.
So the point is they want an access to the sea so they can be well accessible in future as well. But in the process, what they have lost is what they had projected to the world as being one of the superpowers is actually not true. Because if it was so, they would have won this war about a year ago. You know, simple as that. So
Yeah.
it is big of a hype that Russia is showing that they have the bigger power. They lost it. So did Russia, I mean China. Even China is no more a global business that it used to be till past what, 2020-ish, I would say. So the mighty big figures that we see, and a lot of it is, I think, is a political stunt, and what is projected is really not the truest, most figures. Because remember when China was pulling out, we were wondering, oh my gosh, what's going to happen to American economy? How are we going to sustain ourselves? Da 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 da. Nothing has changed. I mean, that's how I look at it. I think it's just a big hype, but maybe I'm wrong. I'm
Well,
not a
no,
big
but wait.
political person myself, but that's what I look at it.
I want to challenge and or question a little bit what Dolph was saying, because if you remember at the very beginning, what the Russians tried to do is they tried to go straight for Kiev, which back in
Right.
my time was called Kiev, but okay, fine. Now it's Kiev. And so if you remember, they basically had that column goes from, I think it was from Belarus, just going straight to Kiev. And I think their thought was, well, if we capture the capital, the rest of the country will follow. And that didn't work. The resistance was, to your point, I think they were misinformed about how much they would be welcome. So that part didn't happen. The logistics didn't happen. Long story short, for whatever reasons, they didn't make it. They had to come back. So I think their goal is not to capture a third of the country or 20% or whatever it is. Their goal was to capture the whole thing. And my question then is, so they captured Crimea back in I think 2014 it was. Now they've got other sections here in 2022, 2023. Even if you had a peace agreement, would they in the future, even if it's 10 years from now, try to go back and get the whole thing?
Well, look, if you go back to Northern Ireland, in 1921, Ireland was divided between the six counties known as Northern Ireland, which remained within the domain of the United Kingdom, and the other 26 counties became a republic. And there was lots of disagreement and what have you. And then we started in 1968, went into civil conflict. Absolutely dreadful. Dreadful. And there were three people in place that started negotiations and this is what Dolph was talking about. What's the end game, you see? So we had a prime minister in England, we had a prime minister here, and we had Bill Clinton and a few more people that were doing background work. And they were in some kind of alignment that it was time to stop. And it's now stopped 25 years ago, and President Biden is supposed to be coming here next week, or is it next week? Or this week to celebrate this 25th year. But the unionists are still unhappy. You know, they have a bad reputation, even though they're elected. And I think we have to be more inclusive, more inclusive. And I mean, without peace, you have nothing, you know,
Yeah.
peace
Oh,
and
and by the
dignity.
way, I agree with Rashna on what she said. What the Russians are looking for is a warm water port. I think
Yeah, yeah,
that
yeah.
motivation and that strategy is clear. The question is, should the rest of the world allow them to do that by force? Um,
Well,
you know, that's
the
the
UN,
part that,
the UN.
a lot
How
of
does the
countries need
UN
a lot
do?
of things. It doesn't mean you move the tanks in there and get them.
Now, the biggest country that is opposing or helping them oppose, one of them is USA. And USA does not want to have another power coming up because the biggest threat to USA in power was Russia and China. China is almost gone. Russia could become the biggest power, and it's USA's chance to stop that from happening. So
But Russia, we all need to do trade with these countries, whether they're red or black or blue or whatever they are. Trade,
trading
it's
is not
about
trading
trade
is
and
not the
business.
problem. Trading was not the problem, Mr. Matrick. I think it was the nuclear power that
Yes,
Russia
yes,
was
yes,
showing off that had to be controlled.
yeah.
Because if
And
Russia goes hayway, it can take away the whole world. Talk about one country or continent was different.
But going back to what Dolph said, and what he intimated, I picked up that Russia must be able to leave this space with dignity. Now, that's a big call. That's a big call. You know,
Talking
they
about
did it in Japan where they left Hirohito as head of state. But, you know, I mean, how do you leave the park with dignity with all the damage that has been caused, you know?
the biggest hijackers of any company, any businesses have come up from Russia. They are total crooked brains out there. That's how I put it.
I don't disagree with
Rajna,
you.
tell us how you really feel.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think we
Okay.
all should get together and oppose Russia for what they're doing. Simple as that.
Well, that's
Honestly,
what the UN
honestly.
are for. What phone the UN, ring them up, you know, ring them up
Hey
and say,
guys,
listen,
let's do something. I hate to cut this off because this is just getting started and this is great. But it is 12:58 p.m. here on the East Coast of the US. And I suspect some of you guys either have to go back to work or have business
Yeah,
meetings or
me
have
too.
whatever. The only thing that I will say is if you all join me about a month from now, it's Wednesday, April the 19th, I believe. And Rhoda's very good about double checking me on her calendar. So, Rhoda,
mm,
please double check me that is our next meeting is Wednesday, April the 19th at 12 noon. If you all
yes,
join me, I promise that right after the introductions and right after the comments on the introductions, we will start back with this topic because, well, one, it's a very interesting topic, unfortunately, maybe.
You have already put me
Two,
on spot, Mr. Sal.
um, another month will have gone by, so it'll have evolved. But I do want to be respectful of everybody's time. I do want to get everybody out on time. Rajna, thank you for joining us. Patrick, all the way from Ireland. Dolph and Wheeling and Rhoda in Indianapolis. And again, April 19th at 12 noon U.S. Eastern Time. We'll keep it going.
I've a thought,
Patrick,
a
last
final
word.
thought. If they that big building that the UN have, if they reduced all the staff just to one floor, and then Dolph and Rashna could lease all the other floors, and you put them to better use. Now, how's about that for an idea?
I'm
Very good.
all
I
in.
want
Give
an
me the
office with a
commission.
window.
Give me the commission check for sure.
Okay. All right, guys,
I am.
listen. April 19th, 12 noon. Please join me.
Okay, guys, wonderful to meet you all. Thanks, thanks.
All
So
right, bye
good,
bye.
so good, so
Make it a
good.
great day.
Yeah, and you guys, and you guys. I keep learning from you all. Thank you.